Just because you take the children out of the orphanage doesn't mean that you totally erase that part of their life and that everything is just magically perfect. It is a lot harder. There's a lot of things they have to overcome.
As we all know, there are many ways to build a family. I'm Elizabeth Pearson Garr, and my guest on this episode of the Experience podcast went way out of her comfort zone to build hers. Mary McQuinn and her husband Tony are now the parents of 7 children, 5 of whom they adopted internationally from Korea and China, all with special needs. As Mary told me, this is not the way she had scripted her life, but now she wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you for joining me here on the podcast.
Hi, Elizabeth. Good to be here.
It's great to see you. We've known each other for a little while now. I think we met when our girls were 2 years old in nursery school. You had
long time
2 older boys who were your biological sons, and then you had adopted this adorable little Emily from Korea. And as I recall, shortly thereafter, we were at a play date in the park, and you said, "We're going to adopt another little boy." So
I'm full of surprises.
So can you tell me a little bit about your journey? You had these 2 sons, and then you decided to expand your family.
Well, okay, my perfect life plan was that I was going to get married, I was going to finish law school, and then we were going to have the perfect family of 3 or 4 kids and, live happily ever after. Life never quite goes according to plan. So finished law school, tried to start our family, had some infertility issues. We're able to have 2 biological boys and then weren't able to have any more. And I just kind of closed that door. That was just kind of how I felt emotionally. I was thankful to have our 2 older boys and just kind of, okay, oh, well, life goes on. So Tony really was one that felt strongly about adopting. I was a little more hesitant about it, took some persuading. I think I'm more of a worrier, but he just really felt like it was the right thing to do for our family. And so I started looking into it, and we weren't really comfortable with domestic adoption. We've just heard a lot of stories of the biological parents coming back after a year or 2 and changing their mind about the adoption. And that just felt like it would be too hard to get attached to a child and have it, be taken away. And we'd both traveled internationally a lot and had a lot of international friends. And so once we started looking into it, we were kind of drawn towards Korea. They had a very well-established system. Adoptions from Korea started in the late 50s or 60s after the Korean War. And the children, after they're placed with foster families and are very well taken care of and loved and get regular medical attention. And we had 2 boys, and we thought, well, it'd be kind of fun to have a girl. And so Korea, there were multiple circumstances. It seemed like it would be a good fit for us. So we put in our application, expecting it would be a long time. And Emily was placed with us maybe a month or 2 after we finished our home study.
Wow.
So
what a surprise.
Yeah, it was a little surprising. It was like the day before Thanksgiving, and I was taking my 2 older boys ice skating, and the phone rang, and it was the adoption agency, and they said, "We have a child for you to consider." I was like, "Oh, okay." I think the boys were in the car, and I was a little distracted. So I said, "Okay, well, send me the information," and then I get the boys, get them all set up, and then it starts to hit me, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh." Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
This could be our new family member.
Called Tony and then looked over the information about Emily. And all of our children have come to us because they've had some type of special need. And so Emily, for example, was born by C-section and had fluid in her lungs. And so she had to be on oxygen for just a few days. And our older boys were both premature. Cameron was 8 weeks premature and Connor was 6 weeks premature. And so we said, a special need of oxygen for 2 or 3 days, that's it. We said, that's an easy one. So after some consideration, we said yes and started on the journey.
The actual journey of flying to Korea or just the planning
No,
process?
the planning process.
Mm.
It takes a while. You have to do with any country. Each country has its own regulations. But with Korea at the time, you have to apply for government visas and do a lot of paperwork and this and that. And so it took us about 4 months to get through all of that. So Emily, when she was placed with our family, was about 4 months. So when we flew over to Korea, she was about 8 months old.
And during this whole process, how were you feeling? Like you said, initially you were a little more reluctant than your husband. And
Yeah.
so it just kind of hit. And then you said, okay, I guess I'm just on this train and here comes our
Yeah.
daughter.
Yeah. You kind of begin to, as you do the preparations, you get excited and you start to think about her. And it's kind of like being pregnant. At first, you're like, oh my gosh. But then, as you do the preparations and it gets closer and closer, then it gets more real and it gets exciting
Mm-hmm.
and you're looking forward to it. So, flew over to Korea and met Emily. And she wasn't real crazy about me at first. you know, maybe she'd never seen a blonde alien or something. So
Did she just cry
um,
and not want to come to you?
she didn't.
Mm.
She didn't. And in fact, we met her once, and then you have to wait 2 or 3 days before you get the final custody of her. And so the day that we got custody of her, we met at the adoption agency, and then we traveled by taxi back to our hotel. She screamed for 2 solid hours.
Oh, how painful.
Just, yeah, finally just cried herself to sleep. But then when she woke up, then she was happier and began to warm up. And we were just immediately taken with her. Just a really cute, sweet little baby, and it was just adorable. And our two older boys, Cameron and Connor, just absolutely loved her. And it was fun to have a little girl to play dress up with. After having two boys and looking longingly at the little girl section,
I
for
remember
many,
that
many
you
years.
would buy really cute, and all your family would buy all these great little girl outfits for her.
Yes, yes. It was kind of like dressing up a little doll.
And the boys were so sweet with her. They
Yes,
were such loving older brothers.
they were wonderful. They've been wonderful throughout all of our adoptions, but Cameron was 13 at the time when Emily came to us, 12 or 13. And he commented one day that life before Emily was like the dark ages. You
Oh,
know, what teenage boy says that?
so sweet.
Yeah, and Connor was about 8 when Emily came home, and he was absolutely in love with her too. Our whole family it was just really fun. We were all really happy, and it was fun to have a little baby. So when we started out, when we decided to adopt, we decided that we wanted to have two because there was an 8-year gap between Connor and Emily. And so we felt like it'd be more fun to have two so they could kind of have each other. And so Emily came home to us 9 months from when we put in our application to when she came home. And we said, that was an absolute miracle, but that will never happen again. The next one will probably take years. And so we better start the adoption application right away,
Mm-hmm.
which we did. And then only like 4 or 5 months after Emily came home, then we got another phone call asking if we would consider this cute little boy. And we were kind of surprised. We thought it'd be much longer, but we said, well, they kind of just come when they come, just like, if you're going to have a baby. Sometimes things happen sooner. It was a happy surprise. And so we said yes. And so the same process, about 4 months of paperwork, and then we traveled over to get him. So Ethan was, again, about 8 months when he came home to us. And so Ethan and Emily are only 13 months apart, which was a little challenging,
I'm
you know.
sure. You had these older
So,
kids, and then suddenly you had these two so close
yes,
together.
yes. Going back to babies times two. so,
And Ethan had a lot of
um,
energy.
yes. Ethan is very high energy. And so then for a while, we thought, okay, well, we're done at, bookends,
Mm-hmm.
older boys and then, the two younger ones. But then again, just kind of started feeling like, our family just wasn't quite complete, and that maybe that there was someone else
Yeah,
that
talk
was.
about that. What was that feeling? Was that from you? Was that from Tony? Was that both of you kind of talking?
Um, uh, I will confess that Tony is the one that kind of gets the feelings. Maybe he's just kind of more in tune, and maybe I am kind of more scared. We are religious and feel like these promptings come from God. Tony says that I hear him too, but I just have my fingers in my ears screaming, la la la, I don't hear you. So, but I have learned that he really gets impressions and they're a real thing and they're meant to be. So this time I kind of felt like maybe it was an older child that was supposed to be in our family. And so started the process again. And for older children, the adoption agency can either kind of do the search for you and place you, or you can kind of do the search on various websites and agencies that have, listings of children that need a family. And so we kind of did both. And we were drawn to our daughter, Christina. And she was 13 at the time. And we just kind of felt drawn to her. She was in an orphanage in China. And so, again, there's lots of paperwork and visas and stuff that you have to do. And so then we traveled to China to pick up Christina. And it's a much different experience.
Can I just back you up? How did you even find her?
Yeah.
How did you locate her and that orphanage and decide on China?
I think at the time we were too old for Korea. Each country has different rules and regulations. And so I think that we as parents had aged out of Korea,
Mm-hmm.
or it might have been that we had too many children to be considered for Korea again. And so we started looking at China, and there were kind of some photo listings of children. They give you a picture and then they give you a little brief profile on them of children that need families. So we, were looking for an older child and found Christina and just were kind of touched by her and decided that she would be the one for our family.
I mean, that's
So,
really, it's really something. It takes very big hearts, I think, to do that. I think most people look for infants
yeah,
because, at least stereotypically, older children might present with more issues. I mean, first of all, 13-year-olds are just going through more in their lives, whether
yes, they
whether
are.
they've been in an orphanage or not. But also, if
Yeah,
they've been without a family, they might come with certain baggage or something and transitioning into a family.
yeah,
And so for you guys to electively take that on is really admirable.
yeah. It is true. Three of our children came to us when they were older. Christina was 13, and then Charlotte was 9, and Natalie was 7 when they came to us. And it is a much different experience. As you says, 13-year-olds already have strong personalities and likes and dislikes, and older children also, unfortunately, have had a lot more difficulty. An orphanage is not a pleasant place to grow up. It's a very hard environment. And so there is a lot that these children have to overcome. Just because you take the children out of the orphanage doesn't mean that you totally erase that part of their life and that everything is just magically perfect. It is a lot harder. There's a lot of things they have to overcome. Their schooling is very haphazard. No matter how old they are, you almost have to start over again at the beginning because there have been a lot of gaps in their learning. And emotionally, they've never known what it's like to be loved or to have a family. And so the first year is a very big challenge. They're adjusting to everything all at once. People always ask me, how do you communicate and what about the language difference? And that's the easy part, honestly. The other part, adjusting to a family. They have a lot of fears because they've never known what it's like to be loved. And they're very guarded, and it's hard for them to trust that this is real and that this person is not going to hurt them emotionally or physically somehow. So it takes a lot to break down those barriers. And sometimes those are things that are with them for life, and you just have to learn how to help them adjust. But with your biological children, there's no guarantee that they won't have challenges, physical or emotional or medical or something. Once we kind of made that mental shift in our thinking, then it just became a lot easier to think about, why not a child that has a special need? And you learn how to help them, and you get help from therapists or doctors or whatever is needed.
It was a lot for you to take on, though. I mean, a lot of people would say, oh, my kids are kind of getting older, they're getting easier, they're growing up, they're kind of becoming more independent. And instead, you're taking on more children who maybe have more needs, need more parenting. You had to lean in a lot more as other parents were kind of getting more freedom.
Yes, yes. I don't know that that really was a big issue. Didn't really, not that I didn't think of that, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Once you reach a certain number of kids, then one more isn't that big of a deal, or two more, three or four, five.
Well, maybe that's what you were thinking when. So you had Christine, and I remember running into you after school one day, and you said, I have something to tell you. We're going back to China and getting two more children. And I seriously thought you were joking. I thought, how could this be real? You had such a full family, such a full life. And I said, no. And you said, no, we really are. And you
We
said,
like to surprise people.
they're 7 and 9. And I thought, you are incredible. And you really
We're
did
insane.
it.
Yes, yes. Charlotte and Natalie, we found out about them after we adopted Christina. There was a charity that worked in her orphanage called Love Without Boundaries. And they are a wonderful organization. They provide medical support and help with schooling and extracurricular things, and just kind of support the orphanage. And so Tony became involved with them and was very impressed. And through them, he found out about Charlotte and Natalie. And the adoption system in China is very haphazard, at least in their orphanage it was. And there's kind of no rhyme or reason as to who the orphanage would put up for adoption, or when they would do the necessary paperwork and procedures to help the children find a family, which was just very sad. So we identified these two little girls, and we said, well, they seem like they'd be a good fit for our family and would be interested in either one of them. So we did the paperwork, thinking, well, if either one of them becomes available, then we would adopt them. And they both came up for adoption at the same time. And so we said, oh, okay, well, I guess we're adding two more at the same time.
Did
So,
you really take it that cavalierly? Like, okay, no problem? Or...
no, behind the scenes, I'm always freaking out. Behind the scenes, I was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh.
Well, that's honest. That's an honest reaction.
Yes, yes, yes. And the way that I deal with my stress is by organizing and doing house projects. So the way that I relieved my stress was to remodel a bathroom in the months prior to traveling. Isn't that what everybody would do?
Get yourself prepared.
I guess it's kind of like nesting, when you're pregnant, one kind of nests and gets the nursery ready.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we traveled to China, brought Emily and Christina with us. The girls were about Emily's age. Charlotte was about a year older and Natalie was about a year younger. This was just 2 years after we adopted Christina. And so Christina came with us because it was, her orphanage, and she knew the language and could help with the girls. But it was a very difficult experience for her to have to go back. It brought back a lot of just traumatic memories,
I'm sure,
for Christina to be in this place again. And then these children don't really understand what it means to have a family, and that you're their forever family, and that you're not just going to abandon them. And so we got over there, and poor Christina thought that we were exchanging her, that we were,
Oh,
going to leave her behind. That was a hard thing for her to understand, that you could love more than one child at a time. And then it's not always easy when you come home. It's kind of like when you bring home a baby from the hospital. The other children have wants and jealousies, and they want your attention, and they will get it in one way or the other. And so people would always ask us, "Oh, how are your new girls adjusting to your family?" And I always say, "Well, if we could get the other children to behave and be a good example, then it'd be a lot easier."
everyone had adjusting to do.
Yeah, yeah, you're kind of jostling for position in the family. So it's challenging, and, again, the language, but at the same time, they're lots of fun trying to teach them through fun ways. Like, we introduced the girls to the game of Uno, and their personalities kind of begin to come out. We discovered that Natalie is very competitive, and she really took it very seriously. And she just loved the word Uno. She would just love when she could scream out, Uno, Uno, Uno. She thought that was the funniest word ever. But then if she would lose, that was just the end. Big, huge tears. And she was very competitive. And that was hard for her to lose. Charlotte was much more reserved and shy and quiet and fearful. If something was bothering Charlotte, the tears and the crying would immediately come out. Versus Natalie, I think, was just as scared, but she held it in. It's scary on both sides. It's a big leap of faith and challenging and scary for the parents, but it's also scary for the children because they don't know what's going on. They've been told that they're going to have a family, but what does that mean? What is a family? What is your life going to be like?
And it's halfway across the world.
Yeah, yeah.
What was it like in the orphanage when you went to visit?
You walk into the orphanage and it's just very, very old and run down, and it's just a really depressing, terrible place. But it's all these children have ever known. And so even though they're going to a better place now, this is their home. That's all that they have ever known. You walk into the orphanage and you see all the children and the circumstances they're living in, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I have to take all these children. I just want to take all of them out of this place. And then you come to your senses and you're like, no, we can't do that.
We don't own a
Okay.
hotel.
Yes. We can only take the, one of the two that we've been approved for. But it's an emotional experience for the child and for the families. It was very emotional for Christina to go back and to see her old friends and to see her nannies and to have to kind of relive all of that. The whole adoption process has been very interesting and very educational. I always say that it's kind of like that Pocahontas song, things you never knew you never knew. But parenting is like that in general.
Sure is.
You have all these fantasies of what your perfect children and perfect life are going to be like. And it doesn't always turn out that way.
It rarely turns out that way.
Yes. So, maybe adoption is a little more challenging, but I've learned a lot about what happens when you don't have proper attachment and care. It's been very educational and challenging, but also very rewarding. So, I've learned a lot about children who, if they don't feel safe and secure, then their brain is focused on just survival skills. And even if they are able to go to school, it doesn't really sink in because their brain is just focused on survival. And the schooling that all the children had, the Chinese girls, was kind of very hit and miss. So we kind of had to go back and start from the very beginning and catch up and deal with emotional needs and academic and physical needs. But that's kind of what happens with any child, even a biological child.
There's no guarantee of what you're gonna get, what your child's gonna turn out like.
Yeah, your biological children can have needs, and sometimes they come up earlier in life, sometimes they come up later in life. So kind of had to work through a lot of that. And the first year is just really a year of adjustment. What does it mean to be in a family? How do you behave in a family? How do you behave at school? How do you sit still? Natalie was our little wild child, just, bounce, bounce, bounce. And if something's bothering her, she takes care of herself. She used to not politely say, hey, you're bothering me. They were lining up to go into the classroom first month of school, and Ethan bumps her, and Natalie turns around and just hits him. I get a call from the principal. I have both your children in the office now. But that was what you did in the orphanage. You had to stand up for yourself. So they have to learn how to behave properly. These children, at least ours, were very, very sheltered, had lived in the same orphanage their whole life and didn't get a chance to go out very much and didn't really get the life lessons that we teach our children and the little nuances that you teach them every day. You're out at, a doctor's office at a store and, don't go behind the counter and look for cars before you cross the street. They didn't know those things. They got car sick because they hadn't really traveled in a car very much. You had to teach them manners. You had to teach them how to socialize, how to sit still. All the little life lessons that you teach your children every day, just subtly, do this and don't do that. From the time they're a baby, they hadn't really learned those things.
All those things that children usually get by just being a part of a family, that those
Yes.
children didn't get because they weren't part of a family.
Yes. And in an orphanage, no one really cares if you have manners. And in the Chinese orphanage, they didn't even have table and chairs. So they just give the children their food and they would just go over to the corner and kind of sit on the floor,
Wow.
Or squat. So it's all these things that they've just never experienced. And some things are very scary to them. Like we took Christina to the beach and to the ocean for the first time. And that was very frightening for her. Everywhere she went, it was very frightening.
Probably intimidating, right? When she was used to just a few rooms or a building.
Yeah. And, you think about like the first time you take your child to preschool. They're nervous, don't know what to expect, and fearful of their teacher and leaving you. And so even though these kids are older, it's the same thing because they haven't had that experience. And the first year is all about learning that and learning the language. And then the real learning can begin after that.
You said the learning the language was sort of the easy part. Was that just with tutors, and how did you acclimate them?
When Christina came, we were fortunate we had a lot of friends who spoke Chinese. And so they would help us, but it's mostly just kind of like you point to things and just kind of drag them along. And it's kind of like language immersion school programs. After a while, they kind of begin to get it. After 6 months or a year or something, then they're pretty fluent. Academically, it's still a challenge. Reading and stuff takes them a little bit longer to be able to catch up on that. But they just kind of learn because you're talking to them nonstop in English all day long. So Christina, being that she was 13 when she came to us, she still remembers her Chinese. She has a lot of friends that she still speaks to. One of the main differences between an older child and a little baby is that the older children come with memories and personalities. And also in Christina's case, we tapped into a network of other children from her orphanage who had been adopted into other families in the U.S. And so Christina was fortunate that she was able to find those friends and reconnect with them again. So that was kind of fun. So she's able to keep up her Chinese. But Charlotte and Natalie lost their Chinese after probably about a year. They really could no longer understand Chinese anymore. So that was interesting between the older and the younger children.
Have any of them asked to go back to their countries of birth, either to visit, or do they feel a special affinity towards the culture of Korea or China?
Yes, we try to still keep their culture alive. We want them to be proud of their culture. We think both Korea and China are wonderful, interesting countries, and that is a part of who they are. And so we gave all the kids English names, but then we kept their Korean and Chinese names as their middle names. And we would like to go back as a family someday. Both Emily and Ethan are very proud of being Korean and interested in learning about it a lot. The Chinese girl, Christina, is still very attached and says that she would like to go back someday. Natalie and Charlotte, they're kind of indifferent. They know that they're Chinese, and I think proud of their country, but I think they feel like they're American. I don't think that they identify as Chinese so much. Versus Christina, I think that is still her first identity.
And there isn't any issues of like wanting to find our birth mother or anything like that, because they all know that that's not an option. Is that? They're too young.
Well, it doesn't really come up. In China, it's like almost impossible to find, the birth parents. And Korea, you have to be at least 18 before you can go back and do a search. We're kind of leaving that up to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
If when they reach an age where they're mature and can understand these things more, if that's something they want to do, then we'll support that.
Mm-hmm.
If not, then we'll support that too. But it's not something that, at least for our children, has really come up. Some adoptees, that is a real big thing for them, a real longing. Each kid is different.
So if you think back to your life like 15 years ago and then think to now, would you ever have imagined that it is where it is now?
No. I always say that if you knew what God had in store for you, what was going to happen, you would run screaming the other direction. And there are many, many challenging days, but just like with biological kids, you're in the thick of it and you're just in the trenches, and it's just so hard and so discouraging, and you just feel like you're not going to survive. But then when you can step back and you can look at the big picture and you can see how far they've come, then you're like, phew, we made it through. I'm sure there's going to be another challenge, but it's very rewarding to see how they've grown and how they've learned. And especially with the Chinese girls, you think of what their life would have been. You don't do it because you want to be this wonderful person. You adopt because you really feel like this child is supposed to be a part of your family. And when you're in the thick of it, it's very challenging and can be very discouraging, just like with biological children. But then there are also other days that are very rewarding when you step back and you see that this little wild child now has grown into a beautiful young woman, and this child who at age 7 had barely even attended any preschool and didn't even know how to count or read or write. Look at what they've become and look at what they can do now. Look at how much they have learned and look at the wonderful person that they've become. A loving, happy, outgoing, energetic child who really adds to our family. So it's been challenging, but it's also been a wonderful and rewarding experience. And we're so happy that we stepped out of our comfort zone and took this leap of faith and brought all these children into our family.
Do you have other advice that you'd give somebody thinking about international adoption, other than it's okay to get out of your comfort zone and take the leap of faith?
One thing that, when I was initially, soul searching and trying to decide if this is something that I wanted to do and that I felt was the right thing for us, I had the thought that at the end of your life, you don't want to have any regrets. Oh, I wish that I would have done this, or I wish that I would have done that. So that helped me to step out of my comfort zone. But don't be afraid to consider an older child or a child with special needs. When people think of adopting, they always think of adopting a little baby. But there are many, many wonderful children out there that they need a family. If you can think outside the box and think of a special need or an older child, then it's a different path, but it is very rewarding, and these children are absolutely wonderful, and it's really enriched our life, and we love them and are just so happy to have them with us.
Well, you've really enriched their lives. I mean, what a great match it's been that they found you and you found them.
Yeah, it has been wonderful. I think that not only as a parent do we learn that we can overcome challenges and grow and learn, but it's these children. These children can overcome their challenges and they can grow and learn. And so I think that's been one of the biggest lessons of how much they're capable of and how well they can overcome their challenges and their difficult beginnings. They can do great things. They just need a chance and they need some help. It was never something that I would have thought that I would have done. I'm kind of a very quiet, conservative, reserved person. I don't like to be the center of attention. But I think life is a journey and an experience that is supposed to test you and, is supposed to help you grow and learn. And I certainly have grown and learned a lot. But in the end, I think it's helped me to be a better person, and it's been a wonderful, rewarding experience.
Do you feel like now that you have not only a large family, but also a multiracial family, that you are a little more the center of attention?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. When we just had the two boys, we used to be a nice little anonymous family, and now we are definitely that family. And we moved to Utah about 2 years ago, and is hoping that we could once again be a nice little anonymous family, but we seem to instantly attract tension. I've also learned to just kind of go with it. I think I was a much different person when I had just my two older boys. I still wouldn't consider myself an extrovert, but it's definitely pushed me outside of the box and given me some wonderful experiences and helped me to meet many people that I would not have otherwise known, including you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, thank you, Mary. This has been so interesting, and it's been a pleasure getting to know your kids and you. So thank you for sharing so many of your experiences.
Yeah, so behind the scenes.
Yeah, definitely behind the scenes.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
It was fun for me to catch up with Mary since I had a front row seat to watch her family grow, but I'd never heard all of these stories before. A lot of what she shared can be applied to all of our lives, even if we're not adopting or raising children. Here are some of my takeaways from our conversation. Number 1, your perfect life plan might not actually be your best life plan. Be open to options. 2, it's amazing what can happen when you step out of your comfort zone and take a leap of faith. 3, when you're in the thick of something, remember that at some point you will be on the other side of it. You've made it through 100% of your hard times. 4, life is a journey that's supposed to help you grow and learn. Being tested and being uncomfortable aren't necessarily bad. And finally, number 5. Adopting, parenting, maybe even life in general, can perhaps be summed up in that Pocahontas song lyric, "Things you never knew, you never knew." I'd like to thank Mary McQuinn for sharing her stories about her family with me. If you want to learn more about Mary, please go to our website, theexperiencepodcast.net. You can catch up on all of our past episodes there and also find out how to sign up for our newsletter and follow us on social media. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please tell a friend about it. I'm Elizabeth Pearson Garr. Thanks for joining The Experience.